Hi, good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome to all of you to the Indian webinar today on the IVF industry in India. So let me just quickly share what we are planning to do today to show you all. Yeah, so we are planning to tackle this webinar in three parts today. The first section that we have, which is the impact of COVID on the IVF industry, where we'll cover, the impact that's been seen by, players in the industry over the short term and long term. The second section will be more about consolidation in the industry and what it means for individual doctor-run clinics and patients. And lastly, we'll be discussing the way forward for the IVF industry in India, both from a financial perspective, a strategic perspective, and the impact of regulations and technology, and so on and so forth. Towards the end, we'll cover Q&A, where we will be including questions that have already been sent in by a lot of you who have registered for the webinar. But we will also take in new questions that have come in. Please feel free to use the Q&A segment in this in Zoom to type in your questions, and we'll try to cover all of them towards the end. With that, I'll pass it over to you, Nitish. Why don't you take it away?
So thanks, Ritika. Good evening, everyone. And again, a very, very warm welcome to everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this evening in this webinar. By way of a quick introduction, our firm, Indium Capital, is an investment banking firm. We provide fundraising and M&A services, primarily in three sectors: healthcare, consumer brands, and technology. As a firm, we've had the opportunity to interact and work with many IVF companies and their CXOs on M&A deals in the past. But today we are delighted to have a terrific panel here with us. Three eminent CXOs and founders of companies, three largest IVF chains in India, in fact, together on one platform. So let me introduce them to you first. First of all, let me start with Kiran Gedela. Kiran is the co-founder and managing director of Oasis Fertility, based out of Hyderabad. Kiran, along with Dr. Durga, started Oasis from scratch about 10 years ago. He was one of the first non-professional, non-doctor founders of a fertility chain in India, and he has been instrumental in the growth of Oasis since then. Kiran's work in defining for Oasis its vision, values, and leadership culture, along with obviously a focus on patients and technology, has been a key to the company's growth and to creating its reputation as a very, very trustworthy IVF brand in India. Oasis today has 12 IVF centers and conducts almost 5,000 IVF cycles every year. So great to have you here with us, Kiran. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Nitish. Thank you.
Next, we have Shobhit Agarwal. Shobhit is the CEO of Nova Fertility. Shobhit has spent many years in leadership roles in Infosys and Manipal. He joined the TPG Group's Asian Healthcare Holdings platform in 2017 as its group CFO and head of business development. Therein, he was responsible for accelerating the growth of all of its portfolio companies. When AHH acquired Nova Fertility in 2019, Shobhit took over the role of CEO of Nova and is currently implementing an operational transformation at Nova Fertility. Nova has 26 odd centers today and conducts almost 12,000 IVF cycles every year. Again, Shobhit, very, very warm welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Nitish. Thank you so much.
And last but definitely not the least, we have Dr. Kshitij of Indira IVF with us. He is the CEO of Indira IVF. From an individual perspective, Dr. Kshitij started as one of the youngest doctors performing IVF in India in 2010. And since then, he has accumulated an experience of almost 10,000 plus IVF cases as a doctor, as an individual. As the CEO of Indira, he has been instrumental in pioneering Indira's unique model of affordable yet high quality IVF treatment. And the results have been nothing short of amazing. In a short span of less than a decade, starting from 2 clinics in Rajasthan, Indira today has become the largest IVF chain in India. It's got a pan-India presence of 90 centers and does almost 28,000 cycles every year. So it's been a phenomenal journey for them, and Kshitij has been instrumental in that journey for Indira. Kshitij, a very, very warm welcome to you as well, and very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Nitish. Thank you for the invitation. Delighted to be a part of such an esteemed panel.
Absolutely. Before we go ahead, I just want to spend very, very quickly. I'll request Kritika to just put up one slide on the IVF industry uh, while it's coming off. So as you can see, I'm only going to spend a quick minute on this. This is a bird's eye view of the IVF industry in India, specifically 2 points. The IVF industry has been growing quite fast in India over the last decade or so. And as you can see on the slide, today it is estimated to be between 4 to 5,000 crores in size, and estimated, 200 to 250,000 cycles per annum, and still growing at about 15% plus per annum. Uh, uh, Going forward, the estimation remains that the growth will continue, because of affordability, easier access, social acceptance, every year in this industry. The second aspect, which has been notable in this industry, has been consolidation. Historically, let's say 10 years ago, this industry was very fragmented. It was composed of mostly single clinics and small chains, which were managed by individual doctors. And there were only a handful of chains with more than a few clinics in them. That was just 10 years ago. It's quite interesting that Indira, Nova, and Oasis, the three largest players in India today, didn't have any notable market share just 10 years ago. They've kind of come up and they have earned that place for themselves only in the last decade. Um, uh, Across the board, as you can see on the slide in the table, there has been significant consolidation. And there are now many chains with national or regional presences, and each one of them continues to grow. So as we see it, this dual trend of strong overall growth in the industry, and B, continued consolidation, what would continue to be the two defining, characteristics of the IVF space in India for the foreseeable future. With this quick overview, let's jump in right into the webinar. And let me pose my first question for the first section, which is the impact of COVID to Kiran. So Kiran, and I'll go one by one to each of Kiran and Kshitij and Shobhit. So Kiran, COVID has had extremely harsh effect on healthcare in general in April. But across the board, we see that in healthcare services, whether it's hospital or single specialty formats or IVF, things have begun to rapidly change over these last 6 months. But I want to get the view from each of you, starting with you, Kiran, as to what has really been your experience, how rapid has been the recovery, are there any impacts which will remain after the COVID thing settles down? What's been your experience, your learnings, your views in this very tumultuous 6 months?
Thanks, Nitish. It's quite interesting, really. We never actually faced something like this before. So that was when we started, let's say, when they announced the shutdown, we had to suddenly shut down operations for about 45 days. It's sort of, in a way, we could reflect back, get off the treadmill, if you will. But it's sort of, during that time, we used that lead time to define our for us, the most important thing was the safety of our patients, doctors, and the other staff who are out there. So we used the lead time to actually develop the safety protocols and training. So pretty much April and May, we didn't have any operations. Mid-May is when we started. But June was very good. But it was a false positive, I should say, no pun intended here, but yeah. So the June was about all the cases that were there that had to be taken care in June. But then going forward, it was fairly flat. But Q2 is when we've been comfortably, at least things appear towards some semblance of normalcy and recovery. It's so we are probably the Q2 we did between 60 to 70%. But September was good. So we're hoping that that will continue for the next quarter, slightly improving. And then I'm basically a little too optimistic perhaps, but yeah, I would think that unless the second wave hits, Q4 is when things would get to normalcy. So this is been my view on this really. But overall, long term, I think it's fundamentally more than about the points that you have mentioned. Beyond that, we have within the sector itself, we have a population of 25 years for greater than 50% of the population, and 65% who are greater between up to 35. So that's a huge thing. And I see I'm very, very optimistic about the future. It's just, this time will pass.
So let me pass it on to Shobhit. Same question, Shobhit.
Yeah.
Have you declared normalcy, or is still grappling with some COVID impact, etc.? And when do you see this coming back to normal for you?
Yeah. So I would segment that into 2-3 parts. So one is I completely agree with Kishore that we had, the April, May completely shut down. But if I say, as you have depicted, right? So if you look at Indian market, so it is around 275, 280,000 cycle market, right? This year, my estimate is that the market will be something around 130, 140,000 cycle, right? And there'll be unfulfilled demand of around 140, 130,000 cycles, which will be in this year, right? My firm belief is the desire of parenthood, and I'll tell you why this is there. So the desire of parenthood, this is just going to get postponed, right? This is not going to get away. So this pandemic this is the beauty of this whole sector also. This pandemic has just maybe postponed the complete demand by maybe a couple of quarters, right? So the next year, which typically should have seen around 300,000 cycles, because we are growing at 15-16%, right? Would have seen around 300,000+ cycles, would be a year when we will see around 420,000 cycles per se, right? So that year is going to be a very, very different year. I would say a super year for all of the players, and like 3 of us will be the biggest beneficiary of that, because and you will come to that segment when we talk about the consolidation, etc. But my belief is that one, the business is there. It is just getting postponed. It is just getting, remained unfulfilled, getting postponed to next year. It's not going anywhere. So I'm not worried about, definitely the business took some hit in first 3, 4, 5 months, but I'm not too much worried about that.
Very interesting.
In terms of like business, yes, we have pretty much back to our pre-COVID. We are at around 75 to 80% of our business. So like we were doing roughly around 1,000 cycles in the pre-COVID era, right? And now we are around 750, 800 cycles. So we are pretty much back on that business. We are very, very confident. The kind of so like couple of our centers are actually doing better than the pre-COVID.
Very interesting.
Especially the tier 2 cities, like tier 1 city, like Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Mumbai are still we are not seeing that high turnaround. But the tier 2 cities like Vijayawada, Coimbatore, Indore, we are finding that the turnaround is much better, and we are already crossing the pre-COVID numbers. That's one point.
That's a very, very interesting perspective.
Second thing, Nitish, which again makes me very, very confident is, say like this lockdown, there was a jerk. Suddenly people, started feeling some heat. There was a, loss of employment. There was loss of, spending capacity, right? And that loss of spending capacity was more on the non-essential commodities, and like, unfortunately, fortunately, we come into non-essential commodity, non-essential treatment.
Correct.
But for the time being, it took off our people's attention from the social need, right? So like me and you can work in say like for months with 2 or 3 sets of t-shirt and the shorts, right? So the social need were like completely gone away as the attention of any common person is concerned, right?
Interesting.
But for how long? So like at the end of the day, we all are social animals, right? So at the end of the day, we have to get back to our social need, and family is definitely one of that social need. So that makes me more and more confident. Say like as we are starting to get into from non-essential to mid luxury and then luxury and so those things are making me more confident that we are getting to that era of spending on non-essential thing very quickly.
And you're saying that essentially demand is delayed, but it's not lost. That's what you're saying. It's just postponed or delayed, but
right.
Let me ask you, Kshitij. I mean, you have a very varied exposure to this across the country, very different cities, access to different socioeconomic classes. What's been your experience across the board, and where have you seen differences in the recovery or get back of volumes?
I think this was one of the most unprecedented challenges that every industry would have faced. And I think being in healthcare and especially in an elective field, I think IVF players were hit the most. Maybe in April and May, we had to shut down just to limit physical contact. Everybody is concerned not just with the reproductive health, but the overall health of the patients that we serve. And also staff safety is of paramount importance. So I think in the initial months, I would say April and May, I think all the clinics and mostly the bigger chains would have suffered on the cash balances. I would say on one side you have the cost going up every month. You have a fixed cost of staff, of rentals, of other things, and on the other hand you don't have revenues going up in the month of April and May. But I think June, we also started, the government lifted up the ban and we instilled some precautionary measures. Every clinic has been doing the triage questionnaire. You follow all the safety protocols, mask and sanitization and social distancing. I think that has brought back the confidence in the customers or the patients, I would say, that they're now willing to come to the clinic. Because, after a point, I would say there was a lot of buzz about teleconsultations and all those things. It's a more to keep our patients engaged, but we can't really do much
beyond that.
Teleconsult. I think we need the patient in front of us to actually treat him or her. And I think starting June, we've also seen a good recovery that has come in the second quarter. And I think as all other clinics would be there, we are also at 75-80% of the COVID numbers. I think what Kiran said, if the second wave doesn't come, I'm more optimistic than Kiran, I would say. Even if the second wave comes in, I think people have now understood this as the new normal, and people are, taking all precautions, keeping their masks and sanitizers in pocket, and then moving around and taking all precautions. And obviously, I mean, that's a big social need in the country. Having a child is not just, I would say, from the health perspective or this, I think it's a social taboo, or you don't feel complete. Women don't feel they have done something in life if they don't bear a child in India. So I think coupled all these social pressures and delay, I would say, as Shobhit mentioned, it's just a delay of childbearing. And I think already Q2 has shown us that the recovery is good. Patients are increasingly coming and getting the treatment done. I'm very hopeful that we should be ending Q4 at par with the last year's Q4 or slightly better also. I think that's the estimate.
That's interesting. Are you also seeing, quick follow-up to that, Kshitij, are you also seeing differences between metros, tier 1, tier 2 cities in terms of how much of a pullback you've had?
Definitely. I mean, Delhi, Bombay, I mean, the cases number were huge. So I think they are slow in recovery compared to the UP, Bihar or other areas that we have, these smaller towns where we have clinics. I think they are recovering faster than the bigger metro cities.
Okay, very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. That's something which is very encouraging, I guess, for the whole of healthcare, because as all of you are saying, IVF is still elective. It can be postponed. And if the elective side is coming back, people are probably just saying let's move on and do what needs to be done.
I don't know, Nitish, but I've seen, I mean, even if you're elective compared to a knee transplant or other surgeries, I think IVF somehow is recovering in a better,
faster
way compared to other elective surgeries, which I think they're still at 35-40% of the pre-COVID numbers.
There's a quick question to all three of you. Is that because in general, people are still afraid to go to a hospital because there's COVID patients there, whereas all of you would not have that as a live, you not have live COVID patients, for example, or stuff like that. You're taking precautions, obviously. Does that play a role?
A very strong reason. Yeah, very strong reason. And people feel much, much safer to come to a clinic, which is not surrounded by many people, very less number of people roaming around.
Easier for social distancing.
Easier for social distancing. They feel much safer, I think, much confident.
Interesting.
We have been, in fact, actually, during this time, especially in the last quarter, patients have been calling, and we're trying to understand their reasons for why they would want to come or they wouldn't want to come. And we can clearly see that, they're also asking how many appointments are there, how many people can actually come. So it's how well we actually engage with them had made the difference in terms of patients coming back.
Got it. Got it.
I think every clinic is extending help in terms of discounts or concessions to the clinics. I think putting the social priorities for the patient first rather than, personal or organizational benefits. I think that would help. I mean, a low cost option or EMIs or other ways to tide over this crisis, financial crisis that some people in the middle income group might have had because of their loss of job or other things. I think that would keep the industry alive and we hope for recovery.
Very interesting. I think this is also following the rest of hospitals, which are, most of them are at least IP demand. OP there is still, as you all are saying, also down. You can only do so much on teleconsults beyond the point. But from a overall IVF industry perspective, this is the view of the three largest players. All of you, you're organized. You've got management teams. You've got a lot of wherewithal, as compared to, let's say, the long tail of individual doctor entrepreneurs who are doing a great job out there, but you don't have access to all the all these resources that you have. And related point to that is really moving on to now section 2, which is consolidation. Like we were saying, there has been consolidation significantly in the last 10 years in this industry. The market share of chains would have been maybe sub 10% in single digits. Now it's probably inching closer to the halfway mark. It'll get there soon. Does COVID and its impact differ? What are you hearing? Has it been different for you versus smaller individual doctor-run clinics? And a related point to that is, do you see more consolidation happening in the future? It certainly makes sense from an Oasis or a Nova or a Indira's perspective to amalgamate these offices. But what does it mean for the doctor entrepreneur? What do they gain or lose from this new dynamic that has come in? And let me just reverse the flow and go with Kshitij first. Kshitij, what do you feel of that? What are your thoughts?
I think there's a huge demand. I think 10 to 15% rate of infertility that we have in India, coupled with the lifestyle that is changing, the awareness levels that are coming. People are getting married late, the stress in your work environment or your overall life, and conscious decisions taken by some females to delay childbearing because of their career. I think coupled of all these things, I think India has a huge market potential going forward. And I would say not just consolidation, that the chains have come in and consolidated the IVF market. I would say it's a mix of consolidation versus expansion of the market. When we started in 2010, I remember traveling across the country for these awareness camps and all. And we noticed that in these smaller towns, I mean, people in Delhi, Bombay, they are very educated. They might know everything. But the new demand that has come in is from these tier 2, tier 3 cities, where you go make them aware of what infertility is all about. And it's a medical condition, although you have social consequences for the same condition. But there are treatment options available. It is affordable. Technology is improving. I think you have better access to good quality equipment, better access to good quality medicines. Probably we all are using the same medicine and the same equipment as a doctor in London or US or Europe or Australia might be using. And then I can strongly vouch that, whatever said and done, our clinical skills are at par or at times better than the doctors because of the experience, because of the work that we do in India. I think all of that coupled, I think India has a huge unmet need. I think, and the change coming in, spreading awareness, working jointly to, expand the meaning of IVF. I think that's where you see the market has gone up, the overall market size has gone up, and it's not about, snatching the same pie and putting it from an unorganized player to an organized player. I think everybody would benefit when the market overall expands. Yeah, and I think it's still 1/3 of what India can do actually in terms of number of infertile couples that we have.
Very, very interesting point. So you're saying there's space for everybody, just kind of limited by by how much everybody can put out there in terms of facilities for IVF, and the demand is quite large out there.
Yeah, on the second question that you say, what it would mean for the single standalone clinics or entrepreneurs or doctors, I think consolidation from my point of view would help everyone, even the single standalone clinic doctors or entrepreneurs, to instill that financial discipline, the professional management.
Right.
You know, you can replicate outcomes quickly. You can scale and instill processes and SOPs across a wider scale in too short a time. You know, when I was running one clinic and then second and third, I took almost 1 or 2 years to stabilize these 2 or 3 clinics. Whereas now it would take 2 months to stabilize, because you have that professional management, bandwidth, and then you have the systematic standardized processes, SOPs. It's like a McDonald's shop now. You just decide that यहाँ पे शॉप खोलना है और कल सुबह जो बर्गर मिलेगा वो सेम क्वालिटी का मिलेगा. I mean, that should be the attitude, that whatever you start and replicate, you are able to give that same quality service to
everywhere
right from the day one.
Consistency. Interesting. Shobit, how about you? What's been your read of the market, and what the individual doctor clinics have done? How they?
So though I agree with Kshitij that there's a space for all, but my view is a little different here. See, if you look at individual doctor run clinic model, right? If you look at business model, right? At first look, it looks very attractive, right? It looks very profitable. But if you take out the a doctor's compensation, because if doctor even works with a chain, he'll get compensated, right? If you take out the doctor compensation, and if you take out the, say, like per se the rental, because most of the doctor run clinic are owned clinic, right? So if you take out these two large component, which looks as a profit, right? You will see the profitability, or you see the ROI is not actually justified to run the business by the profession. So there are two different sects, right? One is professionalism, one is professional, which is doctor, and one is business, right? Yeah. I feel that a good doctor, right, and not without hurting anybody. So normally a good doctor are normally not a good business guys, right? So see, business comes with some risk and some reward, right? And risk is encountered or becomes very clear to us, like in the situation like today, right, in pandemic. So my thought is the risk and reward scenario for an individual run clinic is not too much in favor of a single run business. Right? As I said, the ROI, that kind of risk a doctor takes, right, to establish a business does not give a good ROI, because even otherwise, so most of the profit or most of the return which a business is getting, 70-80% of that business return is basically his or her own compensation and the rent, right? But the kind of money the doctor has invested in the business, the return on that with the kind of risk the doctor is taking is not commensurate. So I see I don't see a great trade-off in that. And I see, because of this pandemic, I think people have started realizing that, what is risk all about. And I see definitely a lot of consolidation happening in the industry.
That's a very interesting point. So you're saying that this risk reward ratio has changed because of the pandemic, or
I'm saying it is more visible to people. People could not understand that initially. I think that is more visible to people. They will start understanding that, that how the risk can affect the business.
Sure. I mean, survival war must have been far more difficult for smaller and individual clinics.
Right. So I think we'll see a huge consolidation in the industry.
Got it. Kiran, what's your view? You've done both, right? You partnered with doctors, you set up your own, and you've had a large city view as well as this thing in your own unique way of integrating doctors into the company first before looking at the operations and financials. What's your view on this aspect?
I think Kshitij and Shobit have covered most of the points that are there, and I'm more in in line with Kshitij in terms of the market being much larger and there's space for everybody. So that's one point that I would say. But yes, we haven't, while had the intention of, let's say, a faster consolidation, getting players on board. The past experience hasn't been you know all that successful. Greenfield still has been a more a thing that actually works well with a good partnership with the doctor. So I would actually share a few different insights in terms of experience share of how it's been in the past. It's what I'm seeing as trends is probably in tier one towns from a patient standpoint. They are gravitating towards actually, especially post COVID, towards an established chain with a set of processes. The doctor-patient relationship remains sacrosanct. It works very well, but it's far more pronounced in tier two towns, where I see, in the other places where the trust and the engagement with the patients, be it the referral doctors, otherwise it's much more stronger. So these partnerships probably would be maybe more interesting in the tier two towns, where we have seen cases where there is an established OBGYN practice out there, but the second generation is coming through, and then they are looking at actually extending and creating another revenue stream. Having said that, I would probably say that it has to be, it still works better in a standalone format where, people would work together. So that's one part of it. But I see a lot of consolidation already starting to happen on the supply side, which say, there have been companies now in terms of from a consumables, which was a big cost item, with companies like Medica Bazaars and Acnamed and a few other players are coming, which ultimately first going to benefit the hospitals, in terms of the margins, and then this will get hopefully passed on to the patient. So that's my view on the consolidation side. And the other points of, it's a very difficult choice, but they need to, the doctors can make the choice. If they're going to more than 40 cycles or 50 cycles, more than 2 or 3 centers, then the whole support of a larger team will always help for them, to actually grow much faster.
From your experience, I can do a quick run through all three of you. Have you seen significant differences in cost structures between yourselves and individual run clinics? You mentioned, Kiran, supply side consolidation or others. Do you get economies of scale when you bung in everything together into a larger group?
It's early days, Nitish. It's really early days, but I think it's eventually going to get there. We see a significant sort of, if I have to say, like 5 years ago, maybe the cost that was there has come down, but at the same time, new service offerings, advanced treatments that have come that have actually got these additional costs. So, I think it's still, we are about, I would say 2 to 3 years away for a far more efficient punch engine there. So on that front, but very optimistic.
So with quick way on that?
Yeah, I see, because we did 1 or 2 consolidation in recent past. We could bring around 20% efficiency in supply chain side itself.
That's very interesting.
So we see a lot of efficiency in consolidation.
Sure. Kshitij, related question to you, coming back to this, one is cost side, but very interesting. You mentioned this model at scale where there's consistency of what a patient experiences and goes through. Have you seen anybody? What's been your experience in implementing this, where the traditional model of doctor-patient interaction of being high quality, where you went to an individual clinic versus a chain, and then that to a very, very highly standardized chain? What are the pluses and minuses that you've seen, and how have you tried to kind of do that versus a single doctor run, highly engaged or presumably highly engaged interaction?
I think this is a very disputable question that I have to answer in all the conferences and webinars, because I am the only one standing on the other side saying, doctor-patient relationship is important. I understand that, but it's not so important that, you have to swear by it. I mean, there are latest technologies coming in, and we'll talk about technology in the next section as to how AI would drive technology in future. So I think we need a switch of our mind saying that, okay, I mean, 40% or 60% of our patients that come to my clinic were looking for my name, and then they would come. Now it's Indra's name, and they come for the brand name. And it's a point in our clinics. I mean, any clinic you go, we don't allow the patient to stick to one doctor, because it's a multidisciplinary team. Somebody is doing the consultations at the same time. Somebody is doing pickup. Third doctor is doing the ultrasound. So if some doctor is posting ultrasound today, he or she would do ultrasounds for every patient. So I mean, a patient in her cycle would be meeting 2 or 3 doctors, and it's free. I mean, you can double check the approach or the treatment plan with one doctor, with the second, and with the third doctor. It doesn't matter, because all of us are on the same page, and that's where we go by standardization, SOP, that this is the process, this is the medication, this is the treatment protocol, and this is what you have to do. And when I'm doing this for the last few years, now I think why I can't go back to a machine and decide this. Why does a doctor need to spend time and energy and all those things into thinking? So I think that's a fundamental difference between my thinking and the earlier thinking of healthcare institution, where it is driven by a star doctor, experienced one, somebody having a gray hair, he or she is more experienced, and the patient should go to them. Our workforce of doctors, you would be surprised. I think the average age of doctors would be less than 35. And then there are people as young as 28 or 29 also who are doing embryo transfers. So I think we follow that. It's a standard process, break down the whole process into different steps, have an SOP around each step, and then everybody has to master that SOP. Then you're good to go.
No, very interesting. I think this was a very good discussion. So, consolidation, all of you are saying that the market is large enough. There's going to be space and opportunity for everybody to coexist, of whether it's single clinic, small chain, or large chain. That's one takeaway. The other is that there are benefits to doctor-run practices, but there are, on the other side, significant benefits on the economies of scale, cost structures, or the simple reduction of risk, like Shobhit and Kiran were mentioning as well. While, like Kshitij mentioned, you can make sure that what the patient gets out of it at the end of the day is still as good in terms of the value that they get. So very, very interesting perspective. I'm afraid we could do this for the next hour, but we should move on to our next section, which is really about the way forward in the IVF industry. So this is a section where we thought we would cover 2-3 topics. One is the impact of technology today and going forward. How will that change IVF? The other is obviously, the ART bill, and what does it mean for the industry as a whole and for players within it. And third is really, a kind of a crystal ball gazing view into where does the IVF industry go from there. So let me just split those 3 questions for each one of our panelists. And let me start with Shobhit. Shobhit, what's really the crystal ball gazing way forward for the IVF industry? I mean, where do you see it in 5 years, 10 years? What are some of the significant things that might change? What are the things that you think about when you look at Nova and its and the industry as a whole as well?
Right. So 2 things. One is like from a very immediate perspective, right? When we are into pandemic, right? So very immediate perspective, I think it's very important for us to reach to our patients, right, our customers, and to have them trust that this is the right time for them, because otherwise there's no definition of right time, right? So right now most of the things are quite much favorable, right, in terms of the they are at home, they are not traveling, they can plan better, couples are together, lesser stress. All those things are pretty much in favor of the patients or customers, right? And as far as the clinics are concerned, they're very safe compared to any multi-specialty hospital or a larger hospital. So that is one part where we, very strongly, passing the message to the patient fraternity that, is a right time, because they should not delay. There's no reason to delay. And as Kshitij told, this is new norm and people have already accepted. Second part, I would say, if you look at industry at large, we are, so I see 5 things which are very important, and that clearly says that the industry is going to grow geometric progression way. One is definitely we are seeing a higher occurrences because of, again, the mean time of marriage is getting delayed, etc. There are definitely higher detection. People, are testing themselves. They understand the science. They are testing themselves. Surely there's a higher acceptance. So this is no more a social taboo. People accept that this is a disease which can be cured, right? Fourth, definitely is higher affordability. People, with the technology, with the more and more availability of IVF treatment, etc. IVF is becoming more and more affordable. Correct. And fifth is definitely higher accessibility, because earlier the IVF chains were like predominantly in 5-10 cities, right? Now it is spreading to tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities, etc. So with all these 5 things, becoming larger and larger, this whole demand of IVF is going to be progressing in the geometric manner. So that is what my strong belief is. And as I told, that immediate task in front of all of us is that we encourage our customer to get them trust that they can come out.
Very interesting. Quick thoughts, Kiran, Kshitij, any thoughts on the overall growth for the industry?
I think it's I see next year, like Shobhit mentioned earlier, it'll be like sort of like a booster year in terms of growth. But what that actually means is even that will drive the next level of even patients to come through. I think the awareness levels from the past 10 years, I see every year it's increasing significantly. People know about the treatments. They do come. There is probably a decision fatigue temporarily at this time. But clearly, I mean, I'll talk about a little about the technology that's actually going to play a role, and how the larger chains can add value. But I see that it's now more a household discussion. It's almost become quite common with a lot of activities that are being done by different people. So I'm very positive about the sector.
Interesting. Yeah. Kshitij, you obviously said that there is a large pie and is growing. Do you see a 15-20% growth rate as a reasonable number for the industry as a whole, or do you think it could be higher, lower?
I think 15-20% is a good conservative number that we all might be noticing, and the industry keeps growing, and as per earlier EY report as well. And I think there are a lot of under-reportings in India. Once the ART bill comes in, system processes become more transparent, reporting is online. I think that we would get the real numbers of the IVF cycle, but I think it would keep on increasing, I think, at the same rate.
Yeah, very interesting. Let me address what Kiran mentioned about technology. I mean, we keep hearing about new technology in the IVF space as a whole, whether it's in the medical side of it or the operating side of it, etc. But there's an open question. Maybe Kiran, Kshitij, both of you can jump in. Shobhit, feel to jump in as well. But let me start with Kiran. Kiran, what is technology in IVF? I mean, and where are the areas where it's making an impact or will make an impact in the future? And is that just medical? Is that going to be financial impact for the patient? Or what are the areas that would stand out as one's benefiting from technology?
Right, I think this is a very interesting topic, Nitish. I get very excited when I talk about this. It's basically traditionally, I've been a tech person myself before coming into the industry. I've seen the whole thinking of tech has been more of ERP systems, process controls. That's how actually we looked at it, and then it sort of has been the backbone for where on which we are building it. Obviously, the expertise of the doctors, how well you can efficiently manage their time using technology. But we have come to a stage where most of these problems to a certain extent are solved. In the sense that it's the industry has evolved to that stage where that part of it is solved.
Available, yeah.
Yeah, available. But extremely interesting is right now more the insights, or if I have to now shift it from a clinic perspective to a patient perspective, I'd probably break down into two parts again here. One would be patient sort of making a decision coming to an IVF center. Number two, patient actually getting through the treatment in the IVF center. The second one is something that probably we understand. I mean, I understand a little better. We've been going a little more deeper into it in the last 6 months. we see that the adaptation to digital has been phenomenal in terms of usage. We have, in fact, an instance where a patient, their results were coming probably in 2 to 3 days time, but we have a patient portal in which the patients log in. The patient logged in 78 times to actually see the result. So that's the level of anxiety that patients have. And, if we can understand, what they're thinking and what their decisions on a far more deeper level after they come to the center, and, hyper personalize the service to a certain extent. I mean, that sort of will really help actually resolve all the softer aspects of going through a fertility treatment while the service is offered. That's, let's say, one part of it. But the other side is even the medical insights that can come from it. So there are now a lot of new age companies that are coming through where I think AI is going to significantly, help drive the outcomes. Where there'll be equipment, the tech team. There should be a significant investment that we think should be on the technical side, where the more research papers come out. As Kshitij last mentioned in the previous conversation, where we've got the best and the best of talent, best of everything out here. We can be really world class with the sheer volume that we handle here in India. And the last one, which is the part where I think we're going to put a significant amount of focus and know, is the patient decision making side. We have to clearly, we're looking at thinking it slightly not from a healthcare perspective, but purely from a consumer behavior standpoint. Go into each of this, what are they thinking, what they're feeling, design thinking in terms of what the opportunities are, and help them make a very, very informed decision of going to a right center. So in every aspect, technology is going to play a significant role in each of these steps, and a chain or a center with a significant budget and a department that's focused on this will reap excellent benefits in the long term.
Very
interesting. That's my view on it.
Kshitij, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think technology will play one of the biggest role, and I think last 6 months we have realized we all have been doing digital marketing, print advertisements, and other conventional means of advertising, and everybody might have seen the phenomenal patient uptake in the digital marketing. So I think digital is, I'll break it into 3 sections probably. One is on the patient side, where, as Kiran mentioned, you should have these patient-facing apps which would keep them engaged, which would keep them informed about their results and outcomes, and keep throwing data and some videos or something onto them regularly so that you keep them engaged. Because pressure is huge during an IVF cycle, and if you keep them informed of the next steps, I think you elevate anxiety to a great extent. On the doctor's side, I would say all the treatment options or AI that we are also driving in the past few months, that how do I make a process that once I key in certain patient data, the treatment comes out from the computer, and it's basically saying that I am not using my personal experience or mind of deciding the treatment. I am using a collective mind of 200 doctors and some 50,000-60,000 cycles that the entire group has done in the last few years, and then coming out with a treatment option to you. So people do understand the power of AI. So I think as a clinical assistant to doctor, slowly, and then probably take a front seat after a few years where the AI drives the treatment option. On the management side, I think a lot of data capturing, if you do at regular intervals, a lot of key insights is what we get. To modulate our protocols, to change any processes or systems. So I think technology will drive all 3 different areas, whether be it a patient or be it a doctor or be it the management side who's running the business. And I think me and Kiran were sharing stage almost a year back, I think in one of the conferences talking about technology. And I remember the recent case of that 74-year-old female getting pregnant that had happened recently. And there was a lot of buzz around regulation and all. Yes. And that's what I say. We do generally talk about self-regulation and technology, but it's good to see, all bigger chains and smaller clinics also implementing all those technologies. I think ethics, transparency. We as a chain have started going for accreditation, QAI accreditation for clinics for IVF. So I think self-regulation, setting up standards, bringing in more transparency, ethics, and then digitalizing the whole experience. I think collectively that should help increase the customer patient confidence into the whole system.
Got it. Very, very interesting. You mentioned regulation somewhere, Kshitij. Let me ask you about the AR. Sorry, please go Shobhit, please.
So little different view when Nitish have got here. So my take is that technology will play a very, very significant role. But so there are two parts to our processes, right? One part is the front end part and second part is the back end part. So like the customer interaction with the doctor. So I believe that that's very important. And I believe that, doctor experience, the complete medical science is very, very important, which my belief is definitely will remain there. But after the ovum pickup, right? When the embryo formation and all embryo gradation, all those processes are concerned, right? Their technology is going to play a very, very significant part. So I'm saying we want to be very, very clear on that side that from the patient interaction of the doctor and doctor's personalized treatment is extremely, extremely important. And that is going to remain. That is not going to be, in my opinion, that's not going to be replaced by the technology, right? That doctor's position and that is going to remain for a very long time. But from the backend side, where once you pick up the ovum and sperm, right, the rest of the part, which is embryology side part, is where the technology is going to play a huge part. That's what my view is.
Very interesting. Again, this is another 1 hour discussion at another time probably, but I'm going to move along. I'm conscious of the time for the panelists and the attendees. Quick views from everybody on the ART bill, what it means for the industry and for yourselves, any key changes, good, bad, quick thoughts.
I think
any one of you can take it here.
Nitish, it's in an early phase. I think that draft needs few changes. We should always refer to established countries who've been having the ART bill or law for quite few decades. I think our draft bill requires few changes, and I think it's a good move that it has been posted to the select committee now. But I think it's a commendable move, overall commendable move. I think because patients would have more confidence in going through the treatment. It would set up legitimate expectancy in their mind. I mean, now some tier 2, tier 3 city patients expect that, once you pay that much amount, it's 100% successful treatment that you are going and paying and getting a baby out of it. So I think that expectancy has to come into the minds of the patients. And I think with the transparent reporting and a centralized registry, I think patients could log on to the centralized registry as they do in US, see the success rates of various clinics and then choose a doctor. I think that would bring in transparency. And I think overall, having an ART bill, regulating the clinics, having standardized processes, patient confidence, central registry.
Sorry to check, but even a common definition of success rate, which can vary. I mean, you can have.
No, I think now it's pretty much standardized. Either you report clinical pregnancy or live birth. I think those are the international recognized norms. I mean, whenever you put a success rate, whatever number you put, I think after that you should put what kind of a success rate are you talking about? I think combined all these factors should bolster the overall sector in a very nice way in the coming years.
Kiran?
We've been very big advocates of this for a long time, Nitish. So for us, the transparency, the reporting, and the ethics, as far as the whole treatment is concerned, is something that we were, we're very, very vocal about it, and we welcome the ART bill. Obviously, there are a few areas probably which need to be ironed out, but HFEA in UK has been a great example of how detailed actually go in terms of reporting. Probably that's a little too extensive, but it sort of gives a clear picture on every part of the patient journey that gets recorded, including the clinical pregnancy and the live birth. All of that has to be reported there. US has a little more, sort of an ease version of it, but we can take the best of both and once that happens, I think we are on the on the world map as far as fertility treatments are concerned. So I think that's my view there.
So you're saying it'll have a pan industry impact in terms of how it is in the Indian industry is viewed in the world as well, because now you got standardization as a
yes, clear, absolutely.
That's very interesting.
And here there needs to be some sort of a discipline also needs to be set in certain places. It's a very good thing in terms of having always a third check on what we are doing. Sometimes I think it's that accountability and the credibility of the whole industry itself improves.
So on the lighter side, I'm sure if anybody in government is hearing this, they'll be very happy that industry captains are welcoming regulation, but doesn't happen very often. Shobhit, any quick views? Your thoughts?
So especially like people like us, like who are pretty much following, ART guidelines, right? So as one example, Kshitij was giving 74 years, old lady getting pregnant. It's not a great thing, right? Because nature has not created a human body for that, right? Of course, you can transfer an embryo and somebody can get pregnant, but right? So ART bill says that it has to be 50 years is the max age. We are following that for last 15 years, 10 years, right? So we are pretty much we are pretty much there. So it's a huge welcome thing for ART to come, and definitely larger chains who are following all those guidelines, ethics, transparency will get largely benefited, and as Kshitij also told and Kiran, that will get a huge trust from the people, like, which was a bit missing for this industry because of a lot of not so great practices, I would say.
Very, very interesting to hear all of you coming out in support of that. I'm again very conscious of time. We've got just a few minutes left. Maybe we can take a couple of very quick questions, Kritika.
Hey, yeah, absolutely. Perhaps we could even extend it by a few minutes to just take a couple of questions. So let me just, and I think there have been, and thank you everyone in the audience. There have been, a stream of questions that have been coming in, via all channels. I think we've tried to cover a lot of them within the, webinar itself. I'll just take up a couple that perhaps weren't covered. So. Okay, so one of our attendee clinic chains has basically asked, what do you all think in terms of future expansion strategy for your chains in terms of organic or inorganic growth? And if you all are looking at inorganic expansion, I'm sure all of you have in the past, what do you look for in the smaller clinics that you're partnering with?
Quick response for each of you on that. That will be interesting for everybody to have a view.
Yeah. I think as a group we were opening 20-30 clinics every year, but I think COVID has made all of us to rethink on the expansion plans and go a little bit slow, because traveling is a problem, and then you don't see that patient uptake quickly coming up. But I think in the next 1 or 2 quarters, I think we should be back on our expansion plans, and I don't see a problem going ahead with expanding and opening new clinics. And obviously, acquisitions is one mode of expanding and reaching out, because accessibility is a key problem. I mean, after awareness is sorted out, you need accessible, good quality IVF centers in your vicinity. So I think if we solve the problem of accessibility and offering a good quality treatment at affordable prices to the mass population, I think that should be good. I mean, and you should see a growth in your chain clinic.
Interesting. Shobhit,
so we are looking at quite aggressive expansion plan, Tish. We are looking surely to reach to a 50 mark by 21-22. Nationally, we are at 26 now this year, and we'll be at around 41, 42. Sorry, we'll be around 35, 36. And next year we would be at around 50 centers. Of course, we are looking at the strategy, which is like tier 2 and tier 3 cities also. So, and in the larger cities where we are trying to, get a deeper penetration by reaching to, different corners of the cities, because all the market is becoming quite hyper local, etc. So yeah, so tier 2, tier 3 cities is our
focus area.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are thinking of a cluster-based approach, Nitish. So we look at actually a geography where, we have an established presence, and within that cluster is when we will sort of expand in that. Again, the numbers are about in another 2 to 3 years, about 50 centers. But like I said, there's going to be a lot more focus of ours on far more deeper engagement, and our IVF chain for the formats would probably be a center which can do about 100 cycles. So that's the sort of, we don't do many satellite centers. So it'll be all about the main full-fledged centers out there, building the teams. And then we have a very, a long-term vision on that, plus building a few digital assets which will support the growth in each of these centers. But like I said, a cluster, a leader within those clusters, and then grow at these places. So that's where we are. And to answer, I think Kritika's question was, what exactly we're looking at from an inorganic, standpoint. I think it's probably the right partnership where, there is meeting of minds. There is an understanding of the value add that actually a bigger brand brings in. At the same time, knowing that comes with certain amount of, reporting, and maybe about 10 to 15% of additional effort, which will play out in the long term. And say if there is a certain ROI at about 10 cycles that they're doing, it will be the same ROI even at 20 cycles. It's only when it gets to 30 to 40 cycles is when, everybody starts to actually benefit and see a real win-win there. So that's something on the observations.
Good to know. And thanks for that, all of you. I think related again from a market perspective is another question that's come in, which is to say that we covered the whole growth expectation in the industry and all in the first segment. But do you guys see competition coming in from outside India to come in and set up their chains here? You see that as a potential future issue?
I think competition is bound to increase in any field you go, and as more and more chains are coming in, you would see competition. But I think you need to stick to your roots of ethics, transparency, good patient engagement, and delivering good outcomes. I think, and then you start ring fencing your business to potential, you start creating those entry barriers. After you have all those ring fencing your chain, like Kiran said, providing digital means to reach out to patient, making sure that you have safety of the IVF procedures, making sure you get good data outcomes, and you keep refining your strategy around whether you want to go as a cluster approach or you want to open more satellite clinics and increase the accessibility. I think competition is bound to happen in any field, and we are no averse to other fields. But I think continuing improving your standard yourself from yesterday and then going every day, I think that would ring fence the business and create more barriers to entry.
Yeah, totally agree with Kshitij there on that. And then I still see, I'll go back to the pie is really large. We welcome if there is a competition. Actually, that's good for the industry on the whole. It improves. Yeah.
I'll tell you one interesting thing, Nitish. We started Bhubaneswar Center, I don't remember, 3-4 years back. I think there were very few IVF centers, and we thought, being the first one or the second or third one, we would have good traction. But, compared to Bhubaneswar in New Delhi, where we are sitting in 5-kilometer radius, I would have 40 centers. But I think that creates the buzz, that creates the market. You have the people flowing in, people understand IVF. They are ready to pay that amount for an IVF cycle, compared to a Nave or a Virgin City where nobody understands IVF, and they are not ready to pay that much for having a baby. I think that's a very contrasting difference. When we think that you should go to a virgin area, I would prefer sitting in the center of where 20 clinics are already there.
No, I'll just spend 30 seconds on this, but we've seen this across healthcare, even multi-specialty hospitals. There are established examples where if 2-3 competing hospitals of 200-250 beds each set up shop within a couple of kilometers of each other, in the short term, they suffer, but after 4-5 years, all of them do well because it kind of becomes a destination. And there are many examples of that across the country. And I guess the same must be true from what you're saying for the IVF side as well. Okay. Can we take one more question? Kshitij, Kiran, Shobhit, are you guys all right to spend 5 more minutes? And we can take a couple of more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And beyond this, if there are any questions, happy to answer over email or something.
We can.
If there's anything.
Yeah.
sure.
That's
Just
certainly
questions, Kritika, and then we should stop. We should not keep everybody else waiting, I guess.
great. So, okay, one last thing, and I think we covered this a little bit in the webinar itself, which is to say that corporatized brands getting patients as a direct-to-consumer approach versus getting referrals from OBGYNs or versus people coming in to meet star doctors. Are you seeing that trend shift towards brand direct-to-consumer outreach, or is it still sort of significantly driven by referrals and doctor-driven?
Shobhit, you can start, I think.
So, yeah, so we see a good mix of both. So, a few years back, if you look at, our model, we had, say, 70-75% patient being referred through the OBG doctor, and 25% will be direct to the market customer. And primary reason being that, the infertility is first detected by your gynae, right? But this is changing over a period of time, and we are seeing huge shift from that percentage. We are seeing the larger market share coming from the direct to consumer side, and rightly so, because consumer, after having advised or having known that it requires a fertility treatment, is smart enough to explore, to analyze who are the players, who are good players, who have got good review, who have got better practices, ethics, etc. So I think you will see the whole market getting shift towards the direct to consumer side, surely for us. Yeah.
So I think in the short term, very quickly to answer, in the short term, yes, the referral market is still very important. In tier 2 towns, it'll be still the doctor relationships and the referrals that will bring in a significant amount of patients. But in tier 1 towns, as we have seen almost a significant 50 to 60% increase in our straight direct to consumer brands. In this, now we are trying to innovate and see, maybe vernacular content will sort of help get the direct to consumer thing. But eventually, I think that's where the industry is going to move, is what my on this is.
Yeah, actually, Karan rightly said, the market are moving. Say, like tier 1 has got to that maturity that tier 2 will take a little more time to get mature to that level.
Yes.
I think I have a contrasting view. I think tier 2, tier 3, they are more driven by the B2C marketing, I think. And for us, it's been like more than 98-99% B2C from the start. And I think on the B2B component, it should be more to do with educating and providing that knowledge to the gynacs in the periphery or the smaller towns, because all of them during the gynac curriculum would not get exposed to so much of infertility related investigations or treatment options. So I think the B2B effort that we should as leaders put into the country is to educate, make aware, handhold them, periodic roundtable meetings, so that you channelize the whole infrastructure in the country in such a way that they are able to put the couples under treatment in the right fashion. Many times you see couples undergoing treatment for 2 or 3 years unnecessarily, right? I mean, that's where, because when I finished my OBGYN, I was not exposed to all these things. As you start doing fertility, you start realizing the importance of what as a gynac you were doing and what you were taught, and what actually in life in fertility is what you require. I think that is a big effort that all of us together should put in to educate the gynacs. I mean, I would not say educate. I mean, everybody is educated, everybody is a degree holder, but to keep them abreast about the latest in infertility treatment.
Yeah. Sure. Nitish, I think we should call it at 6.
Yeah, it's been quite some time, so let's stop here. Like Kiran said, there are some questions. We'll send them out to Kshitij, Kiran, and Shobhit, and get responses and shoot them back to the people who asked them. So apologies for not finishing them, but I must say thank you for all the attendees. I think there were immensely engaged audience throughout the last 1 hour, but but most importantly to Shobhit, Kshitij, and Kiran. Thank you so much for taking the time out to be on this webinar. I really enjoyed the conversation, learned a lot about what your perspectives are. Some of them are very, very different amongst the three of you. Some of them are very common. But it's always very, very fascinating to hear from industry leaders. So really, really appreciate your time and your attention today to this webinar.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Nitish. Thanks a lot, Shobhit, Kshitij, and Kritika.
Thank you, Nitish, and thank you for bringing all three on the same platform.
Absolutely, fabulously.
We should catch up more often now.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Look forward to that. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.